Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this panel on-chain governance, and specifically a very exciting experimental form of on-chain governance, Futarchy. We have excellent speakers on the panel today. We have Rettig, Head of Research at Near Foundation. We have Zaki Manian, co-founder of decentralized asset management project Sommelier. And we also have Denisse Halm, the co-founder of a protocol revenue sharing project, Divvi. I want to just set the stage before we get into Futarchy by defining it a little bit for our audience. We were just at the backstage talking about how to tee up what Futarchy is. So I'm going to give a quick explainer. The main manifesto of Futarchy is this. The main manifesto of Futarchy is this. Vote on values, but bet on beliefs. So the point is that everybody votes on various policies, like you would a normal, if you think about governance, there's like a choice before you and you pick a vote. But the twist is that your vote includes a stake in the asset. So bettors, people that are engaging in that governance, if you vote and you pick the outcome that ends up being the outcome that is, what you've chosen is the policy that ends up being implemented, then you gain financially. There isn't any, in most Futarchy governance models, there's no penalty, of course, to picking any of the options that don't end up becoming policy or don't end up becoming adopted. But that is the general idea. It is kind of merging in this idea of like betting markets with governance, and in doing so, there are arguments that, the policy outcomes are better, voter participation is higher, many different benefits. So that was kind of a very rambly, but like rough way of explaining Futarchy. Panelists, anything I was missing, anything you would add about Futarchy to tee up our discussion?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Robin Hanson was the economist who proposed this originally, and there's some interesting writing and like talks on YouTube you can find about this. Like Vitalik's been excited about this idea as well. We have this concept in mechanism design and game theory called a Schelling point game, and I believe it's used by some oracles today, where like if you want to find out the weather in Seoul, Korea on a given day, and you're an oracle providing data, basically you want to provide the answer that most of the other people are going to provide, and the obvious answer to provide is like the truth in the case of the weather. And if you don't, you're penalized, basically. So it's a very similar idea to that, but I don't know if you want to go in this direction. We could talk, there's upsides and downsides to Futarchy. One of the downsides is you're not necessarily voting on the actual best outcome, you're voting on the most likely outcome because you want to be, or betting on the most likely outcome because you want to be in the winning group. That's a potential downside.
Is there a difference between, let's unpack that a little bit more.
It's a philosophical
the
question.
likely outcome and the outcome that happens, because the idea is that everybody is back to the manifesto, that you're voting on these values of a society or values of how you would want to do things, but you bet on the belief of what the entire collective will choose. And there are, Zaki, as you were saying, that sometimes people choose very irrational things. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the downsides, perhaps. Any others you would mention, Zaki?
So I guess a lot of governance in crypto is trying to define the shape, form, value of some liquid asset. So I think in some sense we always thought that, hey, like this form of like on-chain shareholder democracy would have like inherently inherent Futarchy-like properties, but we haven't found that in practice. And so we're trying to figure out like what the iteration of the game is that gets us there.
In terms of like the iterations that we've seen, I think one of the biggest that has put Futarchy on the map is polymarket and prediction markets, to just show how effective and how accurate style of voting can be. I believe Polymarket was the most accurate in predicting the elections, the U.S. elections this year. Denisse, any other examples of Futarchy that you've seen out in the crypto sphere that you're really excited about?
I've did a little bit of studying before this, and Gnosis DAO has implemented Futarchy already like many years ago. I think it's really interesting, and it's clearly still very new in how they use it, and like the kind of like pros and cons of it. And it does solve some of the issues of governance, like participation. One is one of them, and it does solve it for, like, when we think about it in its purest form. Futarchy does solve it if we think of polymarkets, right? Like, it makes it fun to participate, to vote. Like, voting is just no longer just a task. You're like actually thinking about it and doing your research. But then, will that be sustained when you have to like kind of participate continuously? Will it be as exciting? Will participation really be maintained? I don't know.
So one of the things that I think Polymarket was most successful at was not really prediction. It was picking up the signal that the Overton window about the election had changed far more accurately than polling ever did. And specifically that Joe Biden was not going to be the nominee, Democratic nominee. Polymarket was able to like extract, like picked up that signal. And I think that is a problem, that like the Overton window and like the shifting in the Overton window is actually a big part of the problem in decentralized governments right now, as like we see in like sort of like various DAOs that control chains, treasuries, all of this stuff, where there is, I think, an excessive amount of groupthink about like what is acceptable to be proposed, and we don't have good mechanisms for like picking up when a heterodox idea should actually sort of start bubbling up and be taken more seriously. And maybe Futarchy will become, like if we arrange things, if we can sort of link a prediction market mechanism and the voting mechanism, there will actually be a way to people be like, oh, wait, no, there actually is signal for, you know, maybe the inflation on the Cosmos Hub should be 0.
That's actually the best argument I think I've ever heard for Futarchy. You put it really well. It can pick up signals and shifting Overton windows when polls, for example, don't, because people don't reveal their preferences, you know.
But there's, I guess, a limit, though, to what Futarchy enables. It can pick up the signal of the shift in the Overton window, but can it surface and can it highlight the proposals that should shift the Overton window? Like, is there something, the like previous step, like is there something that would fix that governance problem?
Well, I think the manifestation of that governance problem is like the instrumentalist outcome of things that right now are using like polling-based governance mechanisms are just underperforming, like across the entire industry. Like every single DeFi protocol, every single like L1, L2, like if you can see splits in the market between the one that uses a more centralized decision-making process and a less central. Now, many things with centralized decision-making like blow up, but like the like ones that succeed really do outperform, and frequently we can take, you know, a lead in the market over the more decentralized things. I think, you know, we've seen this with Cosmos and DYDX versus Hyperliquid.
Seeing it with Ethereum right now.
We're seeing it in Ethereum right now. The Optimism as a more centralized entity versus the more decentralized Arbitrum is another great example. You know, the centralized entity that is the Optimism Foundation, good, and like landed Coinbase, and Arbitrum didn't. And so I think that like one of the questions that we have to figure out is shifting, like the polling mechanisms just seem like, I don't think we just have any successes to point to about like, look, this polling mechanism like really did a great job from a business point of view. So I think the question is going to be like, can Futarchy find those heterodox ideas, because those heterodox ideas are the ones that are going to enable outperformance.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. the promise of Futarchy is that it removes like this discovery from like the small committee groups, right? Like where they're like the groupthink is so strong, and they're all just talking about the same thing, and like by enabling others to also like showcase what they're like voting on, then like it can really expand into broader like mindsets and broader like thinking and discovery.
Other than Futarchy being just potentially like a shot in the dark because nothing else has worked and nothing else is working, and potentially this could like save us out of this like kind of hole that we're in. I mean, what are some of like the very real risks, or you think like drawbacks of Futarchy being experimented with so far?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has been experimented with enough yet. I'd like to see more experimentation. I'm leading a governance initiative for the near ecosystem called House of Stake. I'm like, actually, it hasn't been on the table yet, but I'm super open to the idea of experimenting with Futarchy and House of Stake, so we should talk about that. But like for me, the elephant in the room is that Plutarchy, it's not exactly the same thing as plutocracy. Sorry, did I say? Futarchy is not exactly the same thing as plutocracy, but it's very close to it. It's very plutocracy adjacent. And I think money corrupts everything, and I think that's very dangerous. We can dig into that more if people agree with that statement, but it makes me very uncomfortable, the thought of like money being the thing, the thing by which we're measuring, kind of like outcomes here, because other things matter.
But I think it's, like, I do disagree, because I think the promise of Futarchy again is to like select what we believe together is the best outcome, but then to actually make the outcome happen, like a lot other things need to happen after like the decision is made. And so if we can get to a decision with Futarchy, then like we at least know we're all aligned into what we should be investing in to drive the space forward, to like grow whatever it is that we want to grow. Futarchy is just like the kind of pre-step to actual impact.
But I don't think that's what Futarchy achieves. I don't think it gets us to vote on the best outcome. I think it gets us to vote on the outcome that's most likely to make the number go up, and that's not always the best outcome.
Fair.
So, I mean, I don't know where in the history of the Futarchy idea, but it's definitely like been in my brain for a long time, has been this idea of also tying some amount of the bet, of like the profitability of the bet, to the outcome actually happening and like some metric actually moving. That idea somehow exists within the space. I don't know.
That kind of solves the criticism that you just raised, which is like it helps us choose something, but doesn't help with the execution part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into some of the ways in which Futarchy is being uniquely advanced in the crypto space. Like, why is it that you think that? Well, Lane, I want to go back to some of the experiments that you were sharing about Futarchy that you're interested in. We've got technologies like public blockchains, and we've also got the rise of AI. When Futarchy as an idea was presented, these technologies were not, as advanced. What aspects of these like recent technologies do you think is really kind of is the hotbed for allowing Futarchy experimentation?
I got this really terrifying dystopian vision just now as you were describing AI
Explain.
and Futarchy, because they're both in their own right, I think, have a potential to become quite dystopian. And the idea of like
Totally.
AI overlords that are also plutocrats is just kind of terrifying to me. So I kind of put Futarchy into a bucket of new governance ideas and concepts and tools, along with things like quadratic voting, RPGF is probably in that bucket as well, liquid democracy, Harburger taxes. Like the Radical Economics book talks about a bunch of these things. I guess the answer I would give to your question directly is like blockchains are little economies in a box. They're like little micro economies. It's kind of hard to like they're not quite companies. They're sort of like companies, but not quite companies. They sort of exhibit properties of nation states, but they're not quite nation states. So they're a great place to experiment with these novel governance technologies that in ways that are relatively low stakes. So I think that's actually like a really exciting and kind of like beautiful outcome. Almost like if crypto goes away tomorrow, we will still have delivered great conferences, great swag, zero knowledge, and novel governance primitives, right?
It's funny, from our previous panel, the moderator who was doing the Can Ethereum Win panel, GM, we were talking in the backstage. He was saying how, like, in some ways, you could think of all crypto coins as like testnet tokens for real, like the world's value potentially going on chain, but like the crypto native assets just being total testnets. And yes, you're so right. There's like these like sped up ways in which you can experiment with. Like,
that was never possible before in the history of economics, right? Like, economists famously have to find like natural experiments, and but now you can actually spin one up. It's not that hard, right? So I think it's a very powerful tool for economic testing. I don't know that we've like kind of pushed that to its limits yet.
Maybe one of the other ways in which we should talk about Futarchy is going back to discussing some of the problems of governance and just how critical, how dire, I guess, of a state crypto is going to be in if the current forms of on-chain governance that we have play out without any major kind of innovation. So, Zaki, you were saying that right now, I mean, when you look at some of the examples of centralized governance and having tokens that outperform other tokens because they have more decentralized forms of governance, can you talk a little bit more about what has happened, what you've seen with Cosmos governance? And, you know, obviously Futarchy is one of the experiments, but are there any other practical governance tools that you think could be immediately applied to, say, like an ecosystem like Cosmos that would help immediately?
So I think we've experienced in the history of Cosmos like a lot of failure modes of governance and like choices emerging from the governance mechanisms on a variety of different chains that like in the long run you know, seem like they like just made the wrong choice. And
you mean the token holders, like the atom holders?
Like the token hold. You know, the token holders were swayed by various influencers, various influences, various founders of various chains, and to make choices that, you know, didn't benefit the value of the assets over the long run. And there's just this continuous struggle around that, and you know, we've sort of a lot more of our energy has gone into now centralized institutions because of the exhaustion, the bribery, the personal attacks, all of this stuff that come from trying to participate in on-chain governance. Most of us are pretty burned out on doing everything with on-chain governance. So I think the question is really how is it that you can like, I think the biggest thing has been, like, one of the questions was, you know, we started out with Cosmos. A lot of the thinking in 2016 was, okay, we have this like relatively primitive form of governance, and we'll be able to evolve the form of governance over time in response to the problems, and like we'll eventually achieve something. What we've instead ended in is like stasis. No one is like, people's increasing disengagement with the governance process. And then, like, you know, and we just saw the same sort of cycle, I think, happen on Solana with their attempt to change the inflation schedule and the inflation system via a very similar mechanism to Cosmos governance. And, like, basically the same thing happened again, you know. It was, like, very painful, very political, lots of personal attacks, lots of emotional, lots of stress. And this is just like, you know, no one wants this.
I think this type of decentralized governance chaos that you're describing can be beneficial for certain projects. I think I would argue Bitcoin governance is working pretty well for Bitcoin. Why? Because Bitcoin is mature and does not want to evolve rapidly. But I think it's really, really challenging if you're trying to get big things done, which these less mature protocols need to be doing.
I mean, the block size wars though, like virtually everything about Bitcoin today was sort of like defined by how the like great battle of the block size wars like played out. And I mean, it's interesting though that like Bitcoin is also right now once again, I think, you know, walking down the road of a pretty substantive governance choice around like the post-quantum transition, right? Like this is like a huge governance issue for Bitcoin.
We'll see if it passes the test. I'm curious as well.
Yeah, it's going to be like, I mean,
it should be the least controversial thing.
Yeah.
But in Bitcoin, everything's controversial.
Everything is controversial. So I, you know, and I mean, like, so many people left the Bitcoin community because of during the governance debates. So
the governance debates for Bitcoin did harden the ideology of a specific camp of what Bitcoin is, and to your point, Lane, doesn't evolve much further beyond that. It will have to evolve, like for quantum, in the post-quantum world. But I wonder, based on your guys' this conversation right now, does this suggest that perhaps decentralized protocols don't work? Like, as in the sense of, if it is impossible to have this type of coordination in such a way that the outcome is a very like competitive market, like a valuable system. Like maybe it destroys the system. Like you could have the maximum amount of node decentralization, geographic decentralization, but this is a centralization force like you cannot stop. Like obviously Futarchy we're hoping like can help somewhat, but like this is a very existential question for blockchains. Denisse, did you kind of have any of the similar like doomsday thinking that I was having when listening to this little discussion?
Yeah, I think so. I think we all like are a little bit burned out to like your point, but it's early, right? Like, yes, it's not working yet, but like, should we give up, right? Like, it's not like decentralization won't work. We have to keep experimenting. We have to keep trying different things, get people to continue engaging, to participate, and to actually like try to evolve this thing together to try to get to something that is maybe not perfectly decentralized. Maybe like that, like decentralization in its purest form is not going to work. But it's so early, right? Like we haven't, like we agreed, like there's not enough experiments with Futarchy. So that's like the idea of the moment. We should experiment with it, and then something else will come and we'll experiment with that. So I'm a really strong believer, like trying things out, and then like, you know, mixing and matching the little bits of what works here and what works there. And it might be different for different communities as well. It's not like one model will work for every community.
My hot take is I don't think it will work, but I think we should try anyway. I think we have to, right? And I hope I'm wrong. So as for why, right, the why is because, like, what are we doing here in the first place if we're not trying? And I would argue the entire purpose of everything we're building, all these ideas we're so excited about, is specifically things like decentralization, permissionless innovation, permissionless participation in governance, right? It's like a more evolved form of democracy if it works. I think we need to keep trying. We need to keep fighting that fight. And it is early. I agree with that. But like extrapolating based on present trends, it's not looking good, to be totally honest.
Okay, but to be clear, I'm very specific in the sense that we are trying as an industry many things. We have a ton of VC money that is backing things like different ways of scaling, different ways to maximize. Ethereum is all about, and Bitcoin, all trying to maximize the decentralization of the network technologically. But there does seem to be a lack of incentives to drive experimentation on the front of governance over these decentralized protocols. And it leads to this apathy and this lack of... Futarchy it's the only exciting governance experiment that we've had in like decades of this industry.
That's not true. I mean, I listed a whole bunch a moment ago, like liquid democracy and like quadratic voting. Those are all exciting as well, I think.
Okay, that's fair. There's some experimentation, but not to the extent that I think we see in perhaps other areas of this sector, and I wonder if that is a concern. I wonder if there's an incentive mismatch, and that ultimately leads to the downfall of many of these protocols.
Is the question that all this capital that is coming into, or has been coming into space, how it's allocated, what it's allocated towards, if we can't even agree what we should be allocating all these resources towards, then yeah, like you're saying, it should be allocated to experimenting with governance. It should be allocated, in my opinion, to like driving more adoption or like more builder growth. We should all try to agree on like what the experiment of the moment is, and maybe put resources and emphasis on that. If it's governance, and like aligning on what a good outcome is of an experiment, right? Like maybe the outcome of that experiment is like, this Futarchy thing doesn't work, but at least we try it and we have data points too, to like point towards and then evolve into a new direction.
I think it comes back to the question of like, what is a blockchain? What do we want it to be, right? And I touched upon this a little while ago. So I said that blockchains exhibit properties of companies, nation states, probably other things as well. If we think of blockchains in a small sense as being like a company, like the next evolution of a public stock corporation, then I think decentralized governance probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Like companies are highly centralized, highly hierarchical in the decision-making processes for a reason, right? That system is highly evolved. It works very well. But on the other hand, they have a potential to be a lot more, right? To represent and replace and augment much bigger human institutions, including and potentially up to the level of the nation state. I mean, that's certainly the vision of the network state movement, right? And we could debate the merits of autocracy versus democracy versus oligarchy and other systems of government, but I think it's good that we have more participatory systems like democracy. And I mean, if the vision is for a blockchain to be that sort of thing, which I think it is for Ethereum for sure, maybe not for other projects, I don't know, then I think, again, we do need to keep experimenting.
Yeah, we'll keep experimenting.
You were talking about incentives. I mean, that's hard. I mean, I guess one of the thought I would add is just like governance is just not sexy. It's not. It's not going to be, right, anytime soon. I mean, maybe we need to make it sexy. I don't know, but like it's like it tends to be perceived of as a thing that slows progress, which it tends to be in most cases, right? If we could, and I think this is why it's hard to incentivize people to participate, if we could somehow flip that around and make governance like the engine rather than the thing that's slowing everything down. I don't know how to do that, but maybe Futarchy is the answer. That would be a step forward.
Yeah.
So I think probably the most exciting capability of blockchain governance is the ability for it to like control a piece of software and for that software to immediately change its behavior based on the governance proposal passing. Like the automated execution of governance is the coolest capability of like blockchain decentralized governance. It's a thing that like doesn't exist in any other form of governance. Like if you have shareholder democracy of a company, all you can do is fire the CEO. You can't like make the company do anything else. Like the shareholders of Google can't like reach in and like change the parameters of search rank. But like that is the cool thing that we can do with blockchain. That the challenge has been we've really had a hard time finding things in blockchain that are persistently important that could be controlled by software. Instead, like what you have is you have a thing, it's like controllable by software, but like why it is important is because like of a bunch of off-chain people who are doing like marketing and market making and blah, 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 blah. And like if those people leave, like the thing that the software controls is worthless. And I think that has made it so that the governance system is not really able to like realize much utility out of this like super powerful capability to like actually like pass a governance proposal and like affect something.
It strikes me that in the same way that crypto is like the native money for AI, because like AI agents are not going to be using our bank accounts, right? They're going to be trading, they're going to be moving crypto around. I think this decentralized governance stuff we're talking about is like the right way to govern AI. I wonder if there's an AI angle there. I know you brought it up earlier for exactly the reason that Zaki just brought up, right? Which is that it has this superpower to just like change the configuration of a piece of code, which is basically what AI is. I think that's an interesting angle to explore. So there's both using blockchain to govern AI, and then there's the opposite, which is using AI to govern blockchain. We're working on both at NEAR, by the way.
But if incentives are there to like achieve a certain outcome, wouldn't AI agents just change the thing to like achieve that outcome? Because
If we let them, I mean, it depends on how we govern the AI agents, right?
Let's not let them run loose yet.
Another kind of unique aspect of governance with blockchains is, Blaine, you had mentioned this in our prep, but the Sybil resistance aspect of it. I think also, Denisse, we were sharing how I think Uruguay forces everyone to vote.
That's right.
But identifies these people because of the centralized database of citizens and being able to identify who is part of the system and who is not. For public blockchains, that's not possible. And that does...
We can all be orbed.
Yeah, right outside, right over there.
Just
Hi,
next to
world
registration.
That's a separate conversation. We're not going to get into the efficacy of scanning people's eyeballs as
Getting
verifying
more and more
they're
dystopian
human.
as this panel progresses.
Yeah, no kidding. But is...
First you get orbed, then the robots hunt you down if you haven't voted.
Exactly.
Vote, vote, vote.
Yeah, we're screwed, guys. We're screwed.
Following this idea, I come from Uruguay where voting is mandatory. If you don't vote in general elections, you get a fine and like a bunch of things are blocked. So everybody has to vote. But participation is high. Imagine if validators could only validate it if they voted. And if they didn't vote, then they can no longer validate.
We actually had that in a Cosmos testnet.
Oh.
And it was
There
in
you
the white
go.
paper that they if they did not vote, we would remove the validator set.
Did you learn them from Uruguay?
Was it gamed in some way?
But we did have an abstain option, and so people just wrote bots to like automatically abstain,
Of course they did.
and
Is that
so then
position
we walked away from that idea. And now my point of view is I mostly regret even letting validators vote.
Isn't this how like Solana works, and actually a lot of other projects?
So, I mean, Solana doesn't truly have a governance system. Like, the governance system is highly informal and unclear how official it is. But, like, people wanted to change the inflation parameter and were and thought they could, like, sort of push through this mechanism as a way of having enough political legitimacy and a sort of regulatory cover for changing the parameter. It sort of ended up in an interesting place. But we've, one of the problems with Cosmos now is like we need the validators to vote to give up their power, and that's also been really hard.
Okay, spicy question based off of this, because I have a very strong opinion about this. Given what we know and what we've talked about with on-chain forms of governance and how they all suck, and there's lots of experimentation happening, I'm under the impression and the opinion that no governance on-chain, that informal governance models, for example, the likes of what we're seeing for Ethereum, for Bitcoin, are actually currently the most viable ways to progress and to support the decentralization and evolution of a blockchain in a way that is not capturable. Would you guys agree with that? Like, I mean, would you guys... Obviously, like, experimentation should still happen on the app layer, but when it comes to really important pieces of software in our industry, the safe and the most, like, best bet is these, like, informal ways of governance, like what we see for Solana, Ethereum, Bitcoin.
Okay, here's the spicy like counter argument to this is like the parameters which informal governance like can actually change seem very constrained. Like it's and like the sort of classic example is like that like comes up in discussions is like, what if Ethereum should mint 10% more supply and buy Monad? Like it's like total like the existing governance mechanisms just like cannot do that. It's like it's totally outside of their capabilities.
I agree with that.
Isn't that for good reason? Would there be a future? Like, why would that ever be something that Ethereum should do? Give me a good example of something Ethereum should do but can't do because of an informal governance
I think that's
system.
a great example of something Ethereum should do and can't do. Have you seen the Ethereum price recently?
Yeah, I mean
Okay,
another
fair. That's fair.
another example is like, okay, like we have this like sort of consensus commitment to 5 clients, and we don't do hard forks until all 5 clients are ready. This is going to kill Ethereum. How do you change this?
Yeah, it's kind of the exact same phenomenon you described a moment ago. Like when you have the validators vote, they're not going to vote against their own interests, right? And when you have all these stakeholders, it's not voting technically, but like they need to come to consensus, right? In the case of Ethereum, how can they remove themselves from the picture? I don't think that there is a way to escape from that.
Like how could you like take half the participants of all core devs and just be like, you don't matter anymore?
Even if it's clear to the world that would be better for Ethereum, the network, the asset, the community, et cetera. There's no mechanism by which that could happen.
Wouldn't the mechanisms, or isn't the mechanisms that are on chain already proven that people will make the wrong decisions? Like people will choose the wrong outcomes. Isn't it easier to change the informal governance process because you're not dealing with on-chain voting and herd mentality dynamics?
I don't know. I think maybe it's easier, but it's kind of dangerous, right? Like we go back to groupthink. We go back to who's shouting the loudest. And
I think there's a bigger risk that we haven't talked about yet with the Ethereum-style informal governance mechanism, and that's, I mean, you've heard me talk about this many times over the years, tyranny of structurelessness, right? I think, to me, that's the thing that just, like, causes the whole house of cards to collapse. For anyone who's not familiar with the concept, it's a beautiful concept. There's an amazing essay from the 70s on this topic. Whenever you have a lack of an actual hierarchy, like a lack of kind of formal roles, formal procedures, et cetera, in any human organization, there's just a natural elite that emerges. That's just human nature. It's just human behavioral psychology, basically. And so this is what's happened very clearly in Ethereum. And it's funny because I understand, as you do, that like the reason Ethereum governance is off-chain and informal is to prevent it from being captured. But I'd argue it was captured long ago by the inner circle, so to speak. And again, there's no way to escape from that mechanism.
All right. Valid.
So basically, we're back to square one. We have no good solutions.
I thought that was a good one, but no. All right. In the last couple minutes of our panel, one final question that I'd like each of you guys to answer is, Blaine, you mentioned that there's a ton of experimentation happening in governance outside of Futarchy. Outside of Futarchy, what are some of these like projects or experimentation that you're seeing in governance that you are super excited about and think the audience should dig into deeper?
I'll start, and I'll be brief. AI governance, I think, is crazy exciting. It's, little plug here. If you're interested in this, like, come talk to me. We're working on this at NEAR, and we can use all the help we can get. Also, shout out to a project called DeepGov that I learned about recently. It is a really exciting initiative that's actually being used in the current Gitcoin grants round. So it's actually like a live thing, and there's a certain amount of the community funding in that round is actually being allocated by AI agents. So they spun up 3 different agents that represent kind of 3 different political parties, and those political parties were created on the basis of the actual like preferences, clustered preferences of the people in that community. I'm hoping we can do something similar at House of Stake in NEAR. Go check. I think there's a deepgov.org website, and again, you can check out the latest Gitcoin grants round. This is the most exciting experiment that I'm aware of that's happening right now.
I'm very excited that anonymous voting has come to on chain now. So you have more and more protocols now that actually have anonymous voting primitives built in.
Powered by ZK?
Powered by ZK. So yeah. Like Penumbra is a Cosmos chain where the governance is you can't see who voted which way, what accounts voted each way. You just see the outcome. You have a bunch of Noir projects that are enabling that. Just like seeing how Cosmos governance has played out, this ability to like sort of see how everyone voted, I think has been a huge factor in like keeping the Overton window like constrained and not being able to think of like get out of the box proposals out.
This is, now that you mention it, this is an advantage of Futarchy. It's anonymous in a way, right?
Let's see. I I'm very excited about moving away from committees and moving more into permissionless lands for funding allocation. So maybe agreeing as a community on like what impact means and how it should be rewarded, and just letting like people just figure out how to drive that impact and reward them permissionlessly. So we're working really hard on trying to automate things that today are like retro funding or milestone-based grant funding, and turning into permissionless automated funding that kind of like impact speaks for itself. So really putting your money where your mouth is. So excited to like move away from governance for not everything in Web3, but at least for some of the capital allocation.
That was perfect because you also said the title of our talk in your answer. Love that.
That's a great title.
Well, thank you guys for listening to this panel, Putting Your Money Where Your Mouth Is. This is the future of Futarchy and on-chain governance. Thanks, guys. Lane, Zaki, Denisse, for the great conversation.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Christine.
Christine.